Who fired him? The CEO demanded. No one knew the quiet single dad was worth billions. The cardboard box nearly slipped from Ethan Cole's trembling hands as he walked out of the towering glass building where he had spent the last 6 years quietly working. Inside the box were a small family photograph, a tiny succulent his daughter had given him on Father's Day, and a worn leather notebook filled with sketches and ideas no one had ever cared to read. Employees stood near the windows whispering as if he had committed some terrible crime. No one noticed the tears gathering in his eyes. No one noticed that the framed photograph showed a little girl laughing beside him on a beach somewhere far away. And certainly no one knew that the quiet single dad they had just fired was secretly one of the wealthiest men in the country. If you believe kindness matters more than status, and that everyone deserves a second chance, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to Beyond Kindness for more emotional stories that touch the heart. Ethan had never cared about titles, luxury cars, or expensive suits. Years earlier, he had built one of the most successful technology companies in the world alongside his college roommate and best friend, a brilliant but reckless dreamer named Sam Whitfield. Together, they had created NovaCore Technologies out of a cramped apartment, surviving on instant noodles and stubborn hope. In the early years, Ethan and Sam slept in shifts on a single mattress in their cramped apartment, taking turns coding through the night while the other answered emails from investors who mostly said no. They were rejected by 17 different venture firms before one small fund finally took a chance on them. Impressed less by their pitch deck and more by the sheer stubbornness in Ethan's voice when he explained why their software mattered. Sam was the dreamer, always chasing the next bold idea before the last one had even shipped. Ethan was the builder, the one who stayed behind to make sure the dream actually worked when real people depended on it. Together, they balanced each other in a way neither could ever fully explain to outsiders. Within a decade, NovaCore software was running in hospitals, airports, and classrooms across the globe, quietly powering systems that millions of people relied on without ever knowing the company's name. Ethan became one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country. Magazines called him a genius. Investors called him lucky. His wife, Claire, simply called him tired, and she was usually the only one who could get away with saying it. Then tragedy struck. Claire was diagnosed with an aggressive illness during her pregnancy. She fought for 2 years, refusing to let sickness steal her joy, refusing to let Ethan cancel a single business trip on her account, insisting that their daughter would grow up proud of her father's work. She kept a small notebook by her hospital bed where she wrote down pieces of advice for Lily to read one day, recipes she wanted her daughter to learn, songs she wanted sung at birthdays she knew she might not live to see. Ethan read every page 100 times after she was gone, memorizing her handwriting the way other men memorized a voice. But the illness won in the end. Claire passed away when their daughter, Lily, was barely 2 years old, leaving Ethan alone with a company worth billions and a little girl who did not yet understand why her mother would never come home. In the weeks that followed, Ethan sat through board meetings without hearing a single word spoken around him, nodding at moments that seemed to require nodding, signing documents he barely read. His executive assistant later told colleagues that she once found him standing in an empty conference room at midnight, simply staring out the window, unable to remember why he had walked in there in the first place. Money suddenly felt meaningless. Board meetings felt like noise. Ethan sat in his enormous office one evening, looked at Lily's photograph on his desk, and realized he could not remember the last time he had picked her up from daycare himself. The board wanted him to keep steering the company forward. Investors wanted reassurance. But Ethan wanted something else entirely. He wanted to be a father. So he did something no one expected. He stepped back from NovaCore, handed daily operations to a trusted executive team, and quietly disappeared from public life. He changed his last name in casual use, grew out a beard, traded his tailored suits for plain sweaters, and moved to a modest apartment across the country. For years, journalists tried to track down the reclusive founder who had vanished overnight. Rumors spread that he had gone bankrupt, that he had joined a monastery, that he had died. Nobody succeeded in finding him, because nobody thought to look for a billionaire behind the counter of a small logistics firm called Bramwell Freight Data, filing spreadsheets under the name Ethan Cole. He took the job simply because he wanted to feel ordinary again. He wanted Lily to grow up without cameras following her, without strangers treating her differently because of her last name. He wanted her to learn humility the way he once had, back when success was still a distant dream instead of a heavy crown. Every morning, Ethan made Lily's breakfast, usually something simple like toast shaped like a star, because she thought stars tasted better. He attempted to braid her hair despite never learning properly, ending up with lopsided braids that Lily proudly wore to school anyway. He walked her the 6 blocks to school, holding her small hand in his, then continued on to Bramwell Freight Data, where he sat at a modest desk processing invoices no one else wanted to touch. His co-workers only knew him as a reserved, painfully polite man who always declined after-work drinks and left precisely at 5 o'clock. Some mocked him quietly for driving a 15-year-old sedan with a cracked side mirror. Others pitted him for raising a daughter alone, assuming his wife had simply left him rather than considering the heavier truth. Ethan never corrected them. He never complained. He simply did his work, said thank you to everyone, and went home to the only thing that mattered anymore. His desk was the smallest and plainest in the entire office, tucked into a corner near the copy machine that jammed twice a week without fail. He kept it almost bare except for a small framed photo of Lily, a chipped coffee mug she had painted for him in kindergarten, and a sticky note in her clumsy handwriting that simply read, "You're the best dad." Co-workers who passed by rarely noticed these small details. They saw a quiet man hunched over spreadsheets, and they assumed that was the whole of him. They never asked what he had built before this job, or what he had lost, or why a man who could clearly afford better chose to eat the same simple turkey sandwich at his desk every single day. Ethan preferred it that way. Invisibility, he had learned, was its own kind of peace. There was one person at Bramwell who treated him with genuine warmth. Her name was Maria Santos, a single mother herself, raising twin boys after her husband walked out. Maria worked in the accounting department 2 desks away from Ethan. She was the only one who ever saved him a seat at lunch, the only one who noticed when he looked exhausted, the only one who once covered his shift without being asked when Lily had a school recital. Ethan never told Maria who he really was, but he remembered every kindness she showed him quietly, the way he remembered everything that mattered. Unfortunately, the company's new regional manager, Marcus Reed, disliked Ethan almost immediately. Marcus had been hired 6 months earlier after aggressively climbing the ranks at a rival firm, and he believed success belonged only to loud, ambitious, visible people. Ethan's quiet nature irritated him in ways Marcus could not fully explain. He saw Ethan's humility as weakness, his punctual 5 o'clock departures as a lack of commitment, his soft-spoken manner as an insult to the hustle Marcus prided himself on. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Lily suddenly fell ill at school. The nurse's office called Ethan directly, her voice tight with concern, explaining that Lily had a high fever and needed to be picked up immediately. Ethan did not hesitate. He grabbed his jacket and rushed out of the building without stopping to explain to anyone, because in that moment, nothing else existed except his daughter's small, trembling voice on the phone asking for her dad. Marcus saw him leaving early through the glass office wall. Without asking a single question, without checking with anyone, he assumed the worst. He assumed Ethan was simply lazy, taking advantage of a quiet reputation to slip away whenever convenient. The next morning, Marcus called a staff meeting and publicly humiliated Ethan in front of nearly 30 employees. He accused him of lacking commitment, of treating the company as an afterthought, of setting a poor example for the rest of the team. Ethan tried gently to explain that his daughter had been sick, that the school nurse could confirm it, that he had never once missed a deadline in 6 years. Marcus refused to listen. He waved the explanation away as an excuse. Several employees lowered their eyes in quiet embarrassment. Maria opened her mouth to defend him, but Marcus shot her a warning look, and the words caught in her throat. No one else said a thing. A few minutes later, Marcus handed Ethan a termination letter across the conference table, his expression cold and final. Just like that, After 6 years of quiet dedication, Ethan lost his job. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply nodded, thanked the room for the opportunity, and walked back to his desk to gather his belongings into a cardboard box. He looked exhausted rather than angry, the way a man looks when disappointment has become too familiar to shock him anymore. Maria watched him leave with tears in her eyes, wishing she had said something, anything, to stop it. Outside the building, rain had softened into a light drizzle. Ethan sat down on a wooden bench near the entrance and stared at the small photograph of Lily tucked inside his box. For a long moment, memories flooded his mind. Claire's laughter echoing through their first apartment. Lily's wobbling first steps across their kitchen floor. The quiet promise he had whispered at Claire's bedside that he would raise their daughter to be kind, no matter what it cost him. He took a deep breath and smiled sadly, the kind of smile that carries more grief than joy. At that exact moment, a black luxury car pulled up to the curb. A silver-haired man stepped out in visible urgency. It was Arthur Bellamy, longtime chairman of Novacore Technologies, the same company Ethan had built from nothing. Arthur had spent almost 2 years searching for him, following faint rumors and dead-end leads, determined to bring him back for a crucial company decision that only Ethan could approve. Sam Whitfield, Ethan's old friend and co-founder, had passed away unexpectedly the previous winter, and his final wish, scrawled in a handwritten letter to the board, was that Ethan personally choose who would carry the company forward. Arthur had hired private investigators, chased false leads across 3 states, and interviewed dozens of people who claimed to have seen the reclusive founder, only to come up empty-handed again and again. It was a small, grainy photograph on a company newsletter showing Employee of the Month nominees at a modest logistics firm that finally caught Arthur's eye late one sleepless night. He recognized the tired but familiar eyes instantly. After finally tracing him to this small logistics firm, Arthur had come in person, hoping to catch him during a lunch break, rehearsing the words he would say after 2 long years of searching. But when Arthur saw Ethan sitting outside on a bench with a cardboard box beside him, his face turned pale with realization. At the very same moment, inside the office building, the CEO of Bramble Freight Data, a sharp and highly respected executive named Rachel Simmons, arrived unannounced for a scheduled inspection. She immediately noticed unusual tension rippling through the office. An assistant nervously mentioned that a quiet employee named Ethan had just been terminated that morning. Then another employee whispered that a luxury car and a well-dressed stranger had just pulled up outside, asking about someone by that same name. Curious and faintly uneasy, Rachel walked toward the glass entrance doors. What she saw outside made her heart stop. Arthur Bellamy, a man whose face she recognized instantly from countless business magazines and headline articles, was standing beside the bench, speaking to Ethan with visible urgency and deep respect. Impossible, she thought. Rachel pushed through the doors and walked outside just in time to hear Arthur speak. "Sir," Arthur said, his voice trembling with relief and worry, "we have been searching for you for 2 years." The world around Rachel seemed to freeze. She stared in disbelief. The quiet, unassuming employee her staff had barely acknowledged for 6 years was being addressed with extraordinary reverence by one of the most powerful chairmen in the country. Her voice trembled as the question left her lips. Who fired him? The question echoed through the entrance like a verdict. Employees who had gathered near the windows to watch the strange scene unfold suddenly fell silent, fear creeping across their faces. Marcus Reed's face instantly turned white. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Finally, one nervous employee pointed a shaking finger toward him. Marcus's hands began to tremble. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Rachel could hardly process what was happening. She turned back toward Ethan, and that was when she noticed the small photograph sitting inside his cardboard box. A little girl with a gap-toothed smile, a family frozen in a single happy moment. Suddenly, understanding washed over her. This man had never been lazy. He had simply been a father doing his absolute best under circumstances none of them had bothered to ask about. Arthur quietly revealed the truth to the stunned crowd gathering near the entrance. Ethan Cole was not merely comfortable. He was, in fact, Ethan Wallace Carter, founder and majority shareholder of NovaCore Technologies, one of the largest software empires on the planet. His personal fortune exceeded $14 billion. Gasps rippled through the small crowd. Someone nearly dropped their phone. Others covered their mouths in stunned silence. Marcus looked as though his knees might give out beneath him. But Ethan remained calm, almost distant, as though the number meant very little to him at all. There was no anger in his eyes, only a quiet, familiar sadness. Rachel felt a wave of shame wash over her. How many times had she walked past his desk without a single greeting? How many opportunities had Bramwell missed because they had judged a man by his cracked side mirror and his quiet lunches, instead of the character behind them? Ethan slowly rose from the bench. He looked at the glass building one final time, the place where he had spent 6 ordinary years trying to be an ordinary man. Then he said something that left the small, gathered crowd speechless. He explained, quietly, that wealth had never once made him happier. The happiest moments of his life were shaped like burnt star-shaped toast, lopsided braids, and a small hand holding his on the walk to school. He said that people often judge each other without knowing the weight they carry. Some are drowning in grief. Some are raising children entirely alone. Some are holding together a life that looks calm on the surface and shattered underneath. Everyone, he said, deserves a moment of kindness before judgment. Tears welled in several employees' eyes. Even Rachel struggled to hold back her own. Maria, standing near the doorway, pressed a hand to her mouth, quietly proud of the friend she never fully knew. Marcus suddenly dropped to his knees on the wet pavement and begged for forgiveness. He admitted, voice cracking, that he had judged Ethan the moment he saw his old car and his quiet demeanor. He confessed he had always believed power needed to be loud to be real, that wealth always looked expensive, that gentleness was something only the weak could afford. Standing there, humiliated and undone, he realized how wrong he had been. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. Then, instead of turning away, he stepped forward and gently helped Marcus to his feet. Forgiveness is lighter to carry than resentment, Ethan said quietly. Hatred only builds a heavier box than the one I just carried out of that building. Marcus broke down completely, sobbing in front of the small crowd, the weight of months of cruelty finally catching up to him. He admitted through broken breaths that his own father had once treated gentleness as a flaw to be beaten out of him, and somewhere along the way he had absorbed that same cruelty and passed it forward without ever meaning to. It was not an excuse, he said, but it was the truth, and he was tired of carrying it. Ethan simply placed a hand on his shoulder and let him speak, understanding better than anyone that people rarely become unkind without first being hurt themselves. In the days that followed, Ethan made a decision that surprised everyone who thought they finally understood him. Instead of seeking revenge against Bramwell Freight Data, instead of letting the company crumble under public embarrassment, he quietly purchased a controlling share of the struggling firm through NovaCore's investment arm. But he did not fire a single employee out of spite. He did not even remove Marcus from his position right away. Instead, Ethan restructured the company from the inside out. He introduced flexible working hours for single parents. He built an on-site childcare program so no employee would ever again have to choose between their job and a sick child. He established the Claire Cole Scholarship Fund in his late wife's memory, offering full college tuition to the children of Bramwell employees. He personally interviewed Marcus, not to punish him, but to understand him, and eventually assigned him to lead a new department focused on employee well-being, a decision that shocked absolutely everyone, including Marcus himself. Slowly, the company transformed. Meetings that once echoed with sharp words became spaces for honest conversation. Managers who once measured worth by visibility and volume began asking quieter questions, checking in on employees who seemed tired, offering help before problems became crises. For the first time in years, the office began to feel less like a battlefield and more like a family. Maria Santos was promoted to head of accounting within the year, a position she had quietly deserved for a long time. She and Ethan remained close friends, and her twin sons became fast companions with Lily, the three of them building blanket forts in the company's new family lounge during school breaks. Months later, Novacor and Bramwell held a joint celebration to mark the one-year anniversary of the merger. String lights hung across the courtyard. Long tables were filled with food from a dozen different cultures, contributed by employees who had once barely spoken to one another. Little Lily, now 7 years old, stood beside her father in a soft yellow dress, her lopsided braids finally growing smoother under Maria's patient hands. She held Ethan's hand tightly, beaming with quiet pride, watching the people around her laugh and celebrate. Employees who had once whispered about the odd, quiet man with the cracked side mirror now approached him freely, thanking him, sharing stories about how the new policies had changed their lives. One young mother told him, voice shaking with gratitude, that the on-site childcare program had let her keep her job after her divorce, something she never thought possible. An older employee nearing retirement thanked him quietly for the tuition fund that would finally send his granddaughter to college. Ethan listened to each story carefully, the way he always had, never rushing anyone, never treating a single voice as less important than another. Marcus stood near the edge of the courtyard, no longer the sharp-edged man he had once been. He had spent the past year quietly leading a new charitable initiative supporting single-parent households across the region, something he had asked to build himself after everything that happened. He rarely spoke about that rainy afternoon anymore, but when he did, his voice always softened. He often told people that meeting Ethan Cole, the quiet man he almost destroyed, had rebuilt him into someone he no longer recognized in the best possible way. He had also, quietly and without asking for credit, begun mentoring young managers on treating people with patience instead of suspicion, determined that no one under his watch would ever again be judged the way he had once judged Ethan. Rachel Simmons, watching the courtyard from a quiet corner with a glass of lemonade in hand, reflected on how far the company had come in a single year. She had rewritten her own leadership style from the ground up, learning to ask questions before assuming answers, to notice the quiet employees as closely as the loud ones. It was, she often said, the most important lesson anyone had ever taught her without meaning to teach her anything at all. As the evening wound down and the string lights flickered gently overhead, Lily hugged her father tightly around the waist. She hesitated for a moment, then looked up at him and said softly that her mother would have been proud of him. Ethan looked up at the darkening sky, tears gathering in his eyes for the first time that whole evening. For years, he had believed that losing Claire had carved out an emptiness nothing could ever fill again. But standing there, surrounded by people who had once judged him and now stood beside him, holding his daughter's small hand in his, he finally understood something he had needed to learn all along. Grief can break a person into pieces, but kindness, given freely and received with an open heart, can slowly, patiently put those pieces back together. Before we finish this story, tell us in the comments, if you were in Ethan's place, would you have chosen revenge or forgiveness? And if this story touched your heart even a little, please like, comment, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder today. Subscribe to Beyond Kindness so more people can discover stories like this one, stories that remind us never to judge a person by the box they are carrying. Because sometimes the quiet man walking out with a cardboard box is not a failure at all. Sometimes he is a devoted father. Sometimes he is a broken soul quietly finding his way back to the surface. And sometimes he is a billionaire who simply wanted, more than anything else in the world, to be treated like a human being.